Some people say, no, I just eat intuitively. Well, maybe that's why you're so fat. Maybe that's why you're so sick. Maybe that's why you're so ugly. Maybe that's why your hormones are all messed up and why you feel anxious and depressed and fatigued all the time. I just want to say that if this sounds like you, I'm not trying to call you out. It's not your fault, but it is your responsibility to watch the rest of this video, understand a bit more what's going on, and make some changes. In this video, I'm going to share why you have failed to eat intuitively, why it just never seems to work. And I'm also going to elaborate on how you can begin to eat intuitively, all right? If you guys know me, you'll know that I always love to look towards nature when it comes to solving the plethora of problems that humans are plagued with in this day and age. And when you look at animals living in nature, why is it that animals can eat intuitively? They can eat exactly what their body wants. It's almost as though nature was designed that way, that our tongues are designed to crave the exact flavors that is going to nourish our body. And these animals, you know, the cow doesn't need to refrain from eating the grass. The gorilla doesn't need to refrain from eating the leaves, right? They can eat as much as they want, and it's delicious to them, and it is desirable. And then when they're full, they stop. And they don't suffer from the alphabet of diseases that we do in our society. They're ripped. They're fertile, they're happy. Even animals living in the zoo, as long as they're fed their natural diet. And these animals, they don't calorie count, they don't track their macros, and yet they all manage to eat exactly what their body needs to maintain optimal health. So with this beautifully perfect system, why is it that it just doesn't seem to work for us humans? The short answer is because you're not eating real food. You're not eating food that is designed biologically for humans. And the long answer is the rest of this video. All right, guys, a lot of this is common sense, all right? But hear me out. Let's have some fun, okay? I think it's pretty obvious why we can't eat intuitively, and it's because we are an ancient species. We have been considered the human race for 300,000 years as Homo sapiens. We have these ancient genetics, and yet we live in a hyper-modernized world, all right? We have these ancient genetics that are coded for hundreds of thousands of years of optimizing our survival, and yet we live in a world where 99% of the food at the grocery store was never available to us for most of our existence as a species. That's a recipe for disaster, all right? And the reality is, for most people, what's on our plate isn't food. We have this food that is disguised to be super nutrient rich via the tastes we sense, and yet it is actually devoid of any nourishment at all. The bottom line here is that our natural instincts are being taken advantage of, all right? The instincts that have kept us alive and allowed us to thrive as a species are now being capitalized on, all right? So, what are these natural instincts? Humans are genetically coded to love three things: salt, sugar, and fat. That's why food at restaurants tastes so good. And that's why a lot of the addictive food in our culture today is so addictive, because it's got these big three that we have been genetically coded to be excited to eat. And now these things are killing us. Salt, fat, and sugar. All right, so let's break these down, starting with my favorite, fat. The most delicious and satiating of all the macronutrients that just dances on the tip of our tongue. It's very obvious that fatty meats have been the predominant source of calories for humans for the last 300,000 years as Homo sapiens, and even beyond that as well. We can see this clear evidence from stable isotope studies, which are basically studies that through testing bone collagen of ancient human fossils, essentially, we can see that the makeup of our diet is consisting of 80% or more large ruminant animals, which is to say fatty meat. Humans are the apex predator. We have been for arguably millions of years, millennia, and fat has been one of the most nourishing macronutrients for our body in that entire time. That's why we love fat, okay? It's delicious. I love it. But the problem is that the fat that we're eating nowadays isn't the fat that we have been eating the entire time we've been a species of humans, okay? In the last 100 years, people have been phasing out these natural animal fats that your grandmother's grandfather's grandmother have been including as a staple in their diet in favor of these hydrogenated vegetable oils. And I'm not gonna rant on how bad these are because I think most people know. I highly recommend looking up the story of Crisco, where they basically, as far as I know, they were a candle making company. They had a bunch of cottonseed oil. They invented electricity and they're like, oh man, we got all this oil, but no one wants candles anymore. And so pretty much they invented one of the largest scams in dietary history, and they funded the government to say that we should all be eating this more or less engine oil over these animal fats that we've been eating for the majority of the entire time of our evolution as a species. It's bad stuff. And so what happens when it comes to eating intuitively is that we are eating all these processed seed oils that our body doesn't recognize. So taste-wise, it tastes like the fat that's gonna nourish us, but actually in our body's saying, but what is this stuff? What do we do with it? You know, like we're not adapted to metabolize this stuff, which essentially leads to eating stuff that our body doesn't want, which causes inflammation, obesity, at least, you know, it is a factor in all these degenerative diseases. And it also causes overeating because our taste says yes, more, while our body says, where is it? Keep giving us more because we aren't getting it. Fat is so important for our bodies, but the right fat. Okay, next up.
You like sugar, huh?
Is there sugar in syrup?
Yes.
Then yes.
So next on the list is sugar. And if you look at the definitive research that shows the makeup of an early human's diet, we can see that sugar and carbs have never been a staple, all right? Yes, we do have some old adaptations from our time in the trees eating fruits and honey. And basically, it's a survival food. If we encounter some honey, some fruit, our tongue tells us, yes, this is delicious, let's gorge on it, okay? But likely for big chunks of our history as a species, it wasn't widely available. You know, likely through ice ages, there may have been none of it available. And we can see indigenous humans that thrive entirely off meat. Like, it's not essential. So the problem here is that while yes, humans can subsist on sugar and carbs, it was never widely available to humans. And now sugar is in everything. Think about it. If you go into the grocery store, everything is packed with sugar in a way that our ancient genetics were never coded to properly thrive on. And this is where it gets really addictive because I believe that most humans, 99% of humans on this planet, are living in this survival mode because they prioritize carbs in their diet. And so when you're always having these sugars, it's been proven that sugar is an addiction. It is not as addictive, but it triggers the same centers in your brain as many drugs trigger, okay? And when it's always widely available to you and you're always eating it, you always want more. It's very interesting that when you actually go back into your natural metabolism of burning fat, like for example, I eat a carnivore diet, a very animal-based diet. And when you do that and you start nourishing your body with these proper animal fats, you'll find that you're no longer addicted to these sugars anymore because your body is no longer in a survival mode. And I'm gonna go more into that towards the end of this video. But that's the problem with sugar. It was never available to us like it is today. Third on that kind of list is salt. And I'm not gonna dive too much into salt right now, but let's just say there's nothing wrong with salt. Our bodies need salt. It is an essential nutrient, but it just adds to the problem. When you have a bunch of sugar, you have a bunch of fat, and you add some salt to it, it creates a tricky situation. Now factor in that it's actually people's jobs. They get up and go to work in the morning, and it's their job to capitalize on these biological human senses and make sure that humans stay addicted to these foodstuffs and stay as fat, sick, and ugly as possible. These ancient genetic senses that have led our species to nourishment for millennia and have allowed us to survive and be here today are being taken advantage of. And the result is we have this food that is insanely rich in the tastes and flavors that our body is genetically wired to desire, and yet actually devoid of any nourishment whatsoever. We have so many calories and yet so little nourishment. And this is why I say it's not your fault, guys. Like, we're genetically wired to indulge in substances that our body tells us are good for us. And so naturally, that's what we're doing. But the reality is we are ingesting so much food that our body was never actually meant to digest. I just did a quick Google search before I started making this video. And apparently, according to Google, it says that around 70% of an American's diet is made up of processed food. That's a problem. And one more thing that actually might be the most important takeaway from this entire video, if you just take one thing, take this. It's actually the combination of sugar and fat that not only makes it so addictive, but makes it so harmful and inflammatory for our bodies, okay? I won't go too into detail, but basically it's called the Randall cycle, all right? Sugars and fats were never meant to be digested together, and at least in major quantities. A little bit of sugar with fat, a little bit of fat with sugar, it's fine. But we have this idea we need to eat a balanced diet. Well, a balance of sugar and fat is a recipe for obesity, inflammation, all the bad stuff. Let's just look at it from an evolutionary perspective. If you had all the fatty meat you could eat, you're not gonna be eating survival foods. You're not gonna be eating carbs and sugars. Whereas if you're in a survival situation, eating carbs and sugars, carbs, which I know are sugars, that's because you don't have access to delicious fatty meat, right? So the two, evolutionarily speaking, it makes sense that they never really coexist. And I'm not gonna dive into the science in this video, but basically the presence of one doesn't do well for the presence of another. And this is why it's very interesting. So I believe it's very obvious that an optimal human diet is a more carnivore, animal-based diet, running on fat, very low in carbs and sugar, because humans don't have any need for it. The fact that there's no essential carbohydrate in a human diet should be a bit of a clue in this direction. But people can also seem to thrive for a relatively long amount of time on a vegan diet and feel better, which is usually more high carb, low fat. And because this is an improvement on a standard American, more 50-50 balanced diet, because we can allow our body to run entirely on sugar and it not be inhibited by fat. So it's kind of one or the other. And as long as you don't combine the two, you can experience health benefits beyond the traditional standard American diet, okay? Now, before I offer my solution, which you've kind of heard me allude to over the course of this video, I want to draw on just one more point that I just love drawing on these common sense points, guys. Like, I want to bring attention to the idea of discipline in our diet. What is going on with that? I have been a part of many restrictive diets for my health, for the ideas of healing and recovering. And I hear people all the time that stick to their rigid diet and, oh, I'm so proud of myself because I didn't eat the cake.
I don't want any, thank you.
Eat it!
And I just want to say, I think this glorification of disciplinary dieting is so bonkers. Like, if you look to nature, no other animal has to do this. And we glorify this idea that you are so strict on your diet, but why does it have to be that way? Why could we not eat exactly what our body wants, as much of it as it wants, and feel great? How every other species happens to live on our entire planet. Humans are the only one that can't do that. And I commend people that do show this discipline in their life. I just think it's a waste of the discipline. It's a waste of mental stimulation. And I gotta say, since switching to a more optimal human diet in my own life, the mental peace and freedom that I've afforded myself is indescribable. That's all I'll say on that. Okay, so the solution. This is how you actually eat intuitively. And I'm gonna break this down in terms of the kind of least change you have to implement in your diet, down through what I think is the most optimal way to eat, to be able to actually eat intuitively, satiate your body, feel good, no stress, life is sweet. the first thing I would do is start just by eating real foods. And I think this is probably obvious. We all know this. For the most part, like if it has a label, it's not food. Yes, there are some exceptions, but eating real food is going to be the first step to answer this problem, okay? There was a really interesting study done almost 100 years ago now in 1939, I think. It's called Choice Diets by a woman named Clara Davis. And what's interesting is we could never reproduce this study in the time we live in now because it would be considered child abuse, which is funny because the children actually all came out and seemed to be doing a lot better than at the start of the study. But anyways, basically, she took 15 orphans. They were orphans. That's why they were volunteered for this study, I suppose, at I think around 1 year old. And for 6 years, they were basically allowed to eat whatever they wanted. Breakfast, lunch, and dinner, they had an array of, I believe, 33 foods that were of, I don't know what they were specifically, but they were Paleolithic, so natural foods, not processed foods. They were fruits and vegetables, meats, eggs, nuts, and seeds as well, I believe, what people kind of figure is a more Paleolithic diet. Not that I totally agree with that. And what's interesting is that these kids all did well. Some of them had kind of chronic diseases and stuff when they started, and they all managed to eat exactly what their body needed to get healthier and be more robust. And by the end of the 6 years, they were all doing really well. And this isn't the best scientific study. There wasn't a control group. There's a lot of flaws in it. But I don't think that means we should dismiss what we see from it, which is that humans, when given natural food options, have the ability to select via taste what is going to be nourishing for their body. The important thing here, and I think what makes it work, is that there was nothing processed. They were natural foods that wouldn't have had ingredients. They just were foods, okay? The next thing I would do is throw away your TV, because more or less nothing that you see in mainstream media about health is accurate. And again, we apply the common sense. This should be obvious given that 99% of the world's population obeys rigidly what they see on the media, and 99 or more % of the population is chronically sick and disease-ridden. I mean, just look at the food pyramid, for God's sakes. The biggest chunk of the food pyramid is grains. And if you look at what we've clearly established as a human's diet for millennia, grains have been the most tiny 0.0005% of that time. And yet it's supposed to make up the biggest portion of our diet. This makes no sense, all right? But I digress. The last point I'll make is that I think a lot of this video is just common sense. It's obvious, okay? A lot of us know what we're not supposed to eat, all right? The problem is we eat it anyways, okay? And why is that? So I believe the way we navigate this crazy world where food has become incredibly addictive and yet very poorly nourishing, the way we eat intuitively is to eat an optimal human diet, what humans are actually meant to eat. In this way, you don't have any more cravings. You don't need to deploy discipline because you're actually giving your body what it wants, what it's desired, and what is genetically coded to be nourished fully on. And that's animal fat. I believe the way forward is an animal-based diet. It is a carnivore diet, or at least a hypercarnivore diet, meaning that at least 70% of your calories come from animal sources and you have that natural fat metabolism. I know that sounds crazy, and I'm not gonna go into why that's our optimal diet in this video. I made another video on that. The reality is we've never done a proper study to determine what an optimal human diet is. We can't do it, okay? We have these epidemiology things where I ate a little bit of red meat, but it's like, what else did you do, okay? A proper study only changes one variable at a time, which means we would need to have some brothers live the entirety of their 100-year life in exact same situations with the only variable change being food. And obviously no one's ever gonna fund that, and it would be abuse. We could never do that. The best evidence we have to see what our optimal diet is and what's gonna allow us to eat intuitively is anthropology, what we are genetically coded to eat. We can look at indigenous humans, what they prioritize, humans with this ancestral dietary wisdom. We can also look at our anatomy and how fat and animal foods encourage our primary metabolism. And the beautiful thing is, and what I can personally testify on, is that when you eat this way, you can start to eat intuitively again, because your body doesn't crave the nasty concoctions that you see on the billboards. Because why would you want that when you're giving your body exactly what it wants, when it feels like every day is your birthday? When you get to live with this intuitive style of eating and live in the same way that every other species on the entire planet lives, there's no stress, there's no limitation, there's no discipline. It's eat as much as you want, whenever you want, of whatever you want, because all you crave is what actually nourishes your body. Anyways, guys, that is the video. That's why you can't eat intuitively, and that is how you can. I love you guys. Thank you for tuning in. Leave a comment. Tell me how you're doing. Tell me what your thoughts are. Tell me if you disagree with everything I said. That's always a hoot. I'm going to go outside and get some sun. Peace.